Hello, everyone who's joining. Just taking a couple minutes just to allow people to come in and settle. And as we're waiting for people to join, I'd love to invite you just to introduce yourself in a chat and write a line or two about what prompted you to join this event and what are you expecting to gain out of this. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so let's get started. So, what can we expect from this event? Well, as you know, these are insights from our research project conducted by Elite Mind, where we got funding in 2022 from Innovate UK. And what we'll get out of this event, then we have overview of external factors that are shaping the industry. We'll look at industry risks and best practices. We'll also look at what good people strategy looks like. And we'll also go into step-by-step process of how to go about designing your own well-being strategy. And finally, at the very end, we will look at how we can measure success and how we can build our own case for well-being initiatives. So hopefully everyone who's here is in the right room, and welcome everyone. So I'd like to start here with a question to you all. How healthy is your organization? How good is your well-being strategy? Think about, does it actually meet people's needs? Is it good for people? Is it good for business? And does it actually work for you? Does it work for you personally, for your career and for your journey? And also, most importantly, how do you know? I mean that we have all of the measures that we can really look into our strategy and see that, yeah, it works for people, it works for business, it's good for me. And actually, we have ways to measure that. So the reality is that most well-being initiatives still remain very reactive and superficial and not necessarily addressing the real underlying cause of health and poor well-being. And also it fails to translate to organizational performance. We don't have how evidence for translating this into results. But why is it? So it's important to recognize that organizational well-being is still a very new, immature industry. So it still lacks those established standards, benchmarks, success measures. There is no transparency across the industry. There is lack of accurate data with every organization that monitors something. They have their own conflicting statistics at times. There is also ineffective use of resources. There's a lot of siloed practices, a lot of kind of competitive ways of working. And most importantly, there is this lack of understanding about what good looks like. So if we really want to know what good looks like, we really need to understand what's the right thing to do and how to do things right. We need to know how to define a starting point for our well-being initiatives, how to map the journey of the destination with specific steps. We need to know how to embed well-being into operations instead of that just being as a standalone initiative. And what is it that we can do internally, where we need external support, what is our responsibility, what's responsibility of employees, and what is the responsibility of experts and providers. So in order to establish what that good looks like, in 2022, Elite Mind was awarded Innovate UK funding to design those well-being guidelines, implementation frameworks, and impact measures for organizational well-being. And we'll share some of that during this event. And that's the whole purpose, to introduce you to those insights. Okay, so what we looked at, what was the research? To overview of that, we had a lot of academic research, desk-based research to understand the best practices, to understand the state of health and the challenges we're facing. The project was a human-centric ecosystemic research and design, which means that it had to include all of the players in the ecosystem. So individuals, providers, experts, organizations, and really looked at an individual perspective of all of those players in the ecosystem. And it looked at how can we make sure that we drive behavioral change and help to translate knowledge into action, because there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of research, but it doesn't necessarily translate into results. This is just a little highlight of our research scope. So it was done over 6 months, and we powered through a lot of academic papers and research. We analyzed providers and competitors. We conducted needs assessments with employees and reviews of representative industry organizations. We also run design workshops with other health and well-being experts. We reviewed other existing well-being frameworks that are being used, and we then co-designed our own frameworks, assessments, and we tested them with 3 organizations for the full process assessment. So who are we? For those of you who maybe haven't met me before and don't know what Elite Mind does, in summary, we are organizational development consultancy, and we use human-centric research and behavioral science to design workplaces that are good for humans. Overall, my background is in behavioral neuroscience. I combine my experience from leadership development and training and mental health support. I've been working with those individuals who have been experiencing long-term mental health issues, individuals who are suicidal, who have chronic health conditions. And my goal is to bridge the gap between high performance and leadership development and scaling and growing organizations, but actually do it in a way that supports individual health and well-being, and in a way that is good for humans. So just to give you a bit of overview, a lot of this research is derived from our consulting approach and how we work. So our consulting model is mainly based on this diagnostic consulting process, where we look at first at measuring individual well-being and assessing human needs in the workplace. We then conduct organizational audit to understand how well those people's needs are met. And this is much more kind of a traditional management consultancy framework, where we're looking to address gaps and risks and see what people issues are affecting organizational performance and what we can do about that. And we then produce insight reports with recommendations, with actionable roadmaps, and then help clients design and deliver some strategic interventions, support initiatives. We help to define success and impact measures, so we create those with them, and we conduct ongoing service evaluations from there. Our biggest value that clients find is from that insights report, because it really takes the guesswork out of what needs to be done, in what order, what are the priorities, what are the risks, opportunities, how to do things right, and what are the right things to do, right? So we can really take that guesswork out of this. And also to really understand how people feel and what they're struggling with, and what they think about work. Very often we find that when employers are asking some of those questions themselves, unless you have a really high level of psychological safety and trust, people will not be honest, and they will not tell you exactly how they feel. So there's a lot of benefit of this kind of impartial, neutral party really coming in and digging in to understand all of this underlining people's struggles in your organization. And once we do that, a lot of companies stop with that, because that gives them a whole roadmap for implementation. But we can also work to design services and to deliver specific interventions. And our goal with anything that we deliver is actually looking at how to build internal capacity of the organization versus depending long-term on, external providers. Really looking at what needs to happen as a one-off initiative. What are certain initiatives that have to be regular and maybe ongoing on weekly, monthly basis? And what are these kind of like longer term strategic initiatives, for example, like, culture change, or maybe, or communication strategy, right? So where does that take us from here? Now, when we started this project, what was really interesting that, the well-being strategy and all of these struggles that people are experiencing and that organizations are experiencing, they do not evolve in a vacuum, right? There's all these ecosystemic dynamics, all these external factors that are shaping organizational health and well-being. So throughout that research, we kind of identify those 6 gaps that are shaping the industry. So I think before we kind of go into, what the right looks like, it's important for anyone working in this field to really understand that, because we know how to fill some of these gaps with some of the knowledge, training, and expertise. So the first and the biggest gap is at the national level, and this is the so-called economic productivity gap. Currently, 1/5 of entire UK workforce is economically inactive. And I'm just kind of using government terms from here that they use. So this is nearly 3 million people that are currently in that working age, and they are not working. So as a result of this, national investments really prioritize productivity outputs over addressing its causes, and it actually filters a lot in legislation and kind of national expectations, what is expected from businesses, and it really shapes some of those expectations of the leaders. Now, the biggest impact on that economy is health-related and productivity loss due to health issues is estimated to be around 100 billion a year, and 21 billion out of that is due to poor mental health. And this is huge. This is one of the biggest figures when you compare to other countries, when you compare to Europe. UK really has a huge economic productivity crisis and a huge mental health crisis, which leads us to that second gap, which is our healthcare gap. So what is the health of our healthcare? So obviously we have a huge prevalence of mental health, but also NHS in itself is not equipped to deal with all of those challenges. So NHS staff are on the brink of exhaustion and burnout. There's fast increasing workload. There's a lot of unfulfilled vacancies. So the healthcare is not equipped to deal with all of the challenges, which means that employees are expecting of their employers to fill some of those gaps. The other gap is the strategy gap. And this is shaped to a degree by that first gap of what are the economic expectations at the national level. But still, well-being is somehow seen as a cost and not a strategic priority of the business, partially due to those kind of clear impact measures and the kind of evolution of the industry where it is. But also there is this huge gap between health and business expertise, which means that the best experts in human health and human performance, they are not the best business strategists, and other way around, right? The best business consultants, they do not have health expertise to really understand how it drives organizational health. And also, HR has never been, trained. It's not part of our training to know how to lead employee health and well-being, right? There's a lot of, legislation and processes and procedures, and the role of HR is kind of in a way to protect people, to protect business from the people and to protect people from the business, right? But when we're looking at health and well-being, it's not really included in our HR training, and yet it's HR roles that are being trusted with this responsibility. So it creates huge gap in kind of creating a lot of kind of superficial solutions and prevent this from being embedded strategically. The fourth issue we identified is the service provision gap. So this is about all of the service providers stepping up to fill the gap that our public healthcare cannot provide. Private healthcare is very costly. When you look at occupational health system, it's really outdated. It also has a lot of shortage of resources. It's not, it's quite elitist that it serves, some of the biggest organizations, and it's not built to support SMEs. Employee assistance programs are also not fit for purpose in a way. We'll look into this later when we look at some case studies. Mental health first aid is also kind of used as this like, oh, we don't need anything else. We have mental health first aiders. So we're really dismissing a lot of other support options that are required because we have these kind of very well promoted national initiatives. And also, it's important to realize that where there is an opportunity in a market, there's always going to be VC money poured into that. And there's this venture capitalist, opportunistic startups that are being fueled by some of them with the good intentions and with lived experiences. And nevertheless, they are commercially driven enterprises. And obviously, they're kind of evidence-based and the impact can be very limited because they're there with wrong intentions from the start. Then we have the leadership gap. So 82% of managers are accidental, and there is over 10-year gap in leadership capacity in the UK. And what this means that, let's say, between the average age where a person is promoted to management role and the average age at which they become trained and qualified with their leadership training. So there is nearly 10 gap between when they're being promoted and when they are given all of the tools to lead. And of course, there is increasing pressures on leadership and management. What we're expecting out of leaders, what we're expecting out of our managers today is very different to what we've been expecting a few years ago. So the training is not catching up with that. And then finally, there is the expectations gap. So a lot of people looking for jobs, and yet employers cannot find the right people. We are saying that, women, neurodiverse people with disabilities and so on, they have the same rights, they have the same equal opportunities, but in reality, the expectations is that they should, but their reality doesn't support that. There is also the expectations gap between different ages, and there are generational barriers between what senior managers expect and kind of younger generations want out of workplaces. And also there is mismatch between kind of these economic shifts of global markets and what are the internal needs of the business. So yeah, those are kind of like big ecosystemic forces that are really shaping the development of the industry. So we'd like to know, which of those gaps do you think has the biggest impact on your organization? So is it that economic productivity and push for bottom line? Is it public healthcare, inefficiencies in that? Is it strategic priorities? Is it affected by service providers, leadership and management capacity? Or is it misaligned expectations? Which one do you feel affects you the most? Great. Okay. So what do we need to do about this? So let's start first with some definitions. What even is organizational well-being? Again, thinking about the fact that it is, very new industry, it still lacks those kind of clear processes, definitions. I'd love to see some of your definitions. So, what I wanted to highlight before I give kind of my definition of what that is highlighting this very important difference between wellness and well-being. And when we were doing this research, we realized that a lot of kind of lack of these strategic initiatives come from the fact that people do not understand what that is. We don't have those definitions. And when we think about wellness, it's actually the process of self-care. It's a routine of how you have your healthy habits to maintain your good health and well-being. So this could be your gym and your yoga classes and your diet and, all of your self-care routines that you are engaging in. When we look at well-being, this is really ecosystemic concept that looks at the state of happiness, like how happy I am with myself, how happy I am with my life, how happy I am with my work. And this is affected by so many different factors, right? So your psychological safety at work, your earnings, political situation, weather, you name it. So there's all of these factors that are affecting that. And we really need to look at well-being from the state of this strategic ecosystemic place, not just from the process of wellness, right? So I think this is where we can often get it right. We say, you know, we have our well-being strategy, but actually what we're really providing is wellness benefits, right? We provide yoga class and gym membership and puppy therapy on Thursday evenings, right? But that is not gonna translate to the whole, you know, well-being at the strategic level. So important to recognize that. And this then leads to our elite mind definition that we have for organizational well-being. So we believe that it is an ecosystemic process that enables sustainable human and organizational health, resilience, and performance. Of course, there's a lot of, you know, other aspects in that of happiness that is, you know, it's already kind of embedded into that as given. But it's really looking that it has to be good for people, but it also has to be good for businesses. And it has to be done in a way that is sustainable at both levels, that we can maintain it over a long period of time. And we often hear that we say, like, you know, people are our greatest asset, right? We see this all the time. And yet we know that people are only assets if they are supported, if they are given the right training, if they have the right environment to be productive, to be happy, to then contribute to the innovation and development of the business. If we don't support our people, then actually they can be a liability, right? If they are ill, if they are on long-term absences, if they are making mistakes that are costly to the business, if, you know, if they contribute to different kind of compliance breaches, if we have, you know, huge mistakes, then all of that can really be a cost to the business. And of course, most companies are probably somewhere in between, where there is kind of like give and take relationship, where we say, you know, employees think, what is the most that I can get out of this company by contributing the least? And the business thinks the same way, right? How I can get the most out of these people by giving them, you know, the minimum that they expect. So it's really, really important to look at what we can do to move this needle and to really get the most out of our people, but in a way that is still good for them. And this approach really requires this dual responsibility. We need to give individual support to them, but it's their individual responsibility to maintain their own health and well-being. And organization needs to provide the resources and help their capacity to maintain their own health and well-being. So we're not just rescuing them, right? But also there is this preventative organizational strategy where we're creating the best environments for people to be themselves, where all of their needs are being met through your culture, through your strategy, through your ways of working. Now, when this is done right, organization can actually be used as a health intervention. And this is a huge passion of mine from the research point of view. And I've spent a lot of time researching the role of the environment on individual health and well-being. And I worked for many years with charities that works with suicidal individuals. And it really kind of prompted that question for me, you know, why you place two people in the same circumstances and one of them will thrive and grow with challenges and another one will end up stressed, depressed, not wanting to live. So I spent a lot of years researching resilience, but environment is way more important than those individual resilience levels, because you can place the most vulnerable individual in a very supportive environment and they will still perform well. And you can take the most resilient person and you put them in a toxic, stressful working environment, they will still end up burned out and their performance will still be compromised. So well-being is really a collective effort. And there's this little quote, I don't know who is it, who said this, but when you replace I with we, illness turns into wellness. Now at Elite Mind, when we conduct our assessments, we have our own well-being and performance index where we try to measure this relationship between health and well-being at the individual level, at both physical, emotional, cognitive, social, economic, environmental health and well-being, and looking at how that interacts with different factors in organizations. So how it's affected by training, development, support ecosystem, alignment and communication in your organization, culture, governance, compliance, and obviously the role of leadership in that is huge. So what companies mainly do? What do we mainly offer to our staff? So these are some of the most popular support interventions. And how effective is it? Well, so from your feedback, not very effective. So only one person rated it 8, and everybody else is rating 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's quite concerning, isn't it? That we have so many solutions, they're all out there, and yet we don't find that as effective as we would like it to be. So let's look into, why is it, and what are some of those challenges of what works, what doesn't work. One thing that you will probably see, and this is from the most popular ones of employee assistance programs, you will see that the biggest employee assistance program provider, which is Health Assured, is under investigation at the moment for compliance breaches. And you've probably seen this in the news, but there are so many issues with employee assistance programs. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I really, really hope that this research and this investigation will kind of prompt some improvement. Now, when we look at employee assistance programs, well, first of all, it's a crisis point assistance. So there is nothing proactive, there's nothing preventative there. And there is no any feedback loops that would feed back to the business to say, hey, this month, 30% of your employees were asking for support with, money or finances or legal support. And there is no any way to get that feedback to see what is it that we can do proactively, preventatively to kind of drive these numbers down. When we interview people, most people say that they would never use it because it's just not delivered in an accessible way. So first of all, a lot of them are still using phone as an initial line. And that's not how, for example, younger people, they would never pick up the phone and ask somebody for help. They want to go on a chat, or there's so many different ways that it's just not delivered in an accessible way. Now, the average rates are around, it's actually between 3 to 6%. It's rarely ever used. And I sometimes ask leaders, executives, have you personally used employee assistance program? And most of them say no. And then my response to that is, if you haven't used it, why are you giving your people something that you don't use yourself, right? Where it does work is where people need some financial and legal support. Where it doesn't work, where people are asking for mental health support. So you cannot choose your own therapist, and we know that that affects a huge impact of the effectiveness of the service. The counselors, to be honest, I think this is a huge issue that is not being spoken about. The counselors who are providing services to employee assistance programs, their work conditions are close to modern slavery. And therefore, we cannot really expect them to provide the level of quality of care and service that we would like. And also, the commercial model of employee assistance programs, it's already flawed because you are paying per employee, right? So let's say the average cost is 75p per person, right? And now your costs are based on how much you support them, right? So it's actually in their interest for people to use the system less. And there are, in case of this investigation, there is proof that Health Assured actually put boundaries in place to say we only use specific number of counseling sessions because this is the biggest cost to them in order to reach specific profitability commercial goals. So that is wrong. There's a whole system is already flawed by the way it works. The other most popular thing that we are looking at is mental health first aid, which is so widely adopted, but when we look at the reviews of the effectiveness, when we look at evidence for it, we know that the only people who are positively affected by mental health first aiders are those people who attended the training themselves. There is no any evidence of mental health first aid translating into any difference and any impact at business level. And there is a lot of risks with the system. There are some articles here written by Emily Pearson, with whom I had a lot of conversations, and we share a lot of values about and kind of, risks around mental health, and also people who have previously worked for mental health first aid. They were also speaking up against this huge push to legalize mental health first aid, to make it a standard, to have that kind of duty as a legal requirement to have mental health first aiders at work. And a lot of experts are actually speaking up against that, including myself. So what's wrong with mental health first aid? Well, there's lack of evidence that it works, as we mentioned, but it's also not regulated. When you look at kind of counseling, therapy, coaching, all of those industries have ethical standards, a whole aspect of supervision, and none of those things are happening with mental health first aid, which creates a lot of safeguarding issues, because there is no rules on who should be attending this training, who is allowed to deliver this training, how do you protect the mental health first aiders themselves. It's also, the whole training is based on psychiatric model of disease, which means that it gives labels to people. And when you give them that to unqualified individuals, you can create risks, because you can have a conversation and say, yeah, this sounds like you have a depression. This sounds like you have schizophrenia, or whatever that is, right? This is actually not consistent with their goal that, mental health first aid mission, they say, to kind of reduce stigma surrounding mental health. The psychiatric model of disease is stigmatizing in itself. So there's kind of incongruencies in kind of how they go about doing that. Now, it works well as educational tool. It's really, I really believe that the curriculum that is delivered by mental health first aid, everybody should have this training, like at schools. Like, we need to have this awareness to understand of these different mental health conditions. It is very useful as educational tool, but there is no practical aid, right? So if somebody is having a panic attack or anxiety attack on your work floor, you're not going to know what to do with it, right? So I think really we should be prioritizing more kind of a practical support and know how to help this person in a moment, rather than just having an awareness with nothing to do. And the biggest concern that I'm speaking against is actually where exactly do we send these people to? If we have our internal support ecosystem that we are sending people to that, okay, great. But most of the time, the way the mental health first aiders are being trained, they are being given the same public helplines, Samaritans, Mind's charity, right? So we're sending people to the ether, right? We're washing our hands of any responsibility, and we are not really sending them to the actual service provider from whom we can get feedback back and to say, has this person have been helped? So yeah, I know when we highlight some of those, it usually, spurs a lot of kind of questions, thoughts, and feedback. So so let me know if you have any kind of questions, thoughts, or reflections at this stage. Of course, I kind of looked into detail only into those two, but of course, there is a lot of other range of things that we are doing. And, there's a lot of things like, let's say, online resources and mindfulness apps. People like it, but they don't actually use it to the point that it would make a difference. Expert workshops and live keynotes can be great if they are delivered to the right people at the right time with the right intentions. Active lifestyle and benefits, again, it's a nice to have, it's a cherry on the top, and it only works if you have all the other prerequisites in your workplace. If you have, there is no yoga class or gym membership will save you from, toxic boss or abusive relationship. And the question should be asking is not, does it work, but where, when, and how does it work, and when it doesn't? Because with the right support, with the right ecosystemic processes in place, they are all useful, right? So as much it's easy to kind of, slay some of those providers, we also need to be understanding that, they experience their own pressures, and these whole kind of like economic and, other pressures, and all of these 6 gaps are also shaping them too, right? And it results in these kind of inefficiencies. So our answer to all of this is this Elite Mind framework that we created for organizational health and well-being, that shows you what good looks like and what are our responsibilities and what is the process that we're supposed to be engaging with. So we start at the center. with inclusion, because this is the level of psychological safety that is a prerequisite for any other initiatives that you would build. Then next, we look at individual health and well-being, and looking at kind of assessing, where our people are at, what is the state of their health and well-being. And then we look at how well our organization is actually providing for those needs, how well we are creating that environment for that health and well-being. So if you see that those rings are actually in different colors, if it's blue, that means it's your organizational responsibility and accountability, and this is in your control, and this is what you are responsible to drive as a business. Anything that is white, yes, you have specific duties and influences on that, but at the end of the day, it's an ultimate responsibility of the individual to maintain their own health and well-being. To also, when we look at then outer circles outside of that organizational strategy, we see illness and wellness, right? So you remember that definition between well-being and wellness, and you will see now why wellness is on the outer circle and well-being is internally, right? So health and well-being is the responsibility of the individual to maintain their own health and well-being, but it is hugely affected by the level of inclusion and psychological safety that you have at work, and by your organizational strategy, operations, your ways of working, right? So it's really kind of sandwiched between those two things. Now, when we were designing this framework, we actually analyzed a lot of other frameworks and a lot of other kind of guidelines. So you have even like, World Health Organization, this kind of prevent, protect, promote, but it doesn't tell you what are you protecting, what are you promoting, what are you preventing, right? So we really picked a lot of those keywords that we're repeating in different frameworks, and we put them in this context of our model. So it is very clear, what is it exactly that we need to do as employers? What are our duties towards our employees? So first, when we look at inclusion and psychological safety, our duty is to protect individual rights and freedoms. When we look at individual health and well-being, our duty here is to develop individual capacity to maintain their own health and well-being, because you remember that bit is individual responsibility. We can only create education, level, awareness, resources of support to support them with that. The biggest area here for the business is how we do that through organizational strategy. And here we're looking at preventing harm and enabling performance through all of these different areas of the organization. When we look at illness, now this is a responsibility of health experts. We are not responsible for curing or treating everyone, and we need to have those boundaries very clear. And our responsibilities here is to identify any health risks and support recovery pathways for the individuals and direct them to those right support health experts. And then finally, as regards to wellness, so this is all of your benefits, your gym memberships, your reward ecosystems. Here, we want to promote self-care. So we want to promote wellness, and we want to reward healthy habits. We want to reward good routines that drive, that health and performance at work. So how exactly do we use this model to build our own strategy? What is our process for it? So again, it follows the rules of the framework from the center inside out. And we start with inclusion and psychological safety. So here we really want to look at how we can assess our level of inclusion and safety at different steps of employee journey. So all the way from recruitment to onboarding, training, to what extent we're checking in with them with like absence and return to work procedures, exit interviews. Are we able to maintain this inclusive, diverse environment in a way that builds psychological safety at work? And this is a key prerequisite to anything else that you will ever do. And that in itself is a huge positive driver of well-being. So if you don't have this done well, then all the other initiatives that you build on top of that will likely to have a very limited impact. So we then look at assessing human needs. And it's very important that what are you building is not just what you think what people need, but what they really need. And the challenge here as well, that if you don't have that psychological safety as a prerequisite, as I mentioned before, people will not tell you what they want. People will not tell you how they really feel. They will not tell you what they think. So we end up having this kind of delusions in a way where, sometimes we go into organizations to conduct those human needs assessments, and companies say, oh yeah, but we have surveys, we have, our engagement surveys, we have our pulse surveys. And yet when we conduct our own assessments, the results are like day and night, because employees are rarely as honest and as open. And the other aspect is that sometimes people don't know what they need themselves, right? They can tell you what they like and what they don't like, but they don't necessarily understand the impact of specific things in their environment and what does it do to their health and well-being. So it kind of requires this kind of understanding of the proper investigation of unmet human needs and drivers of health. Now, next, we really want to look at conducting our gap analysis. So we really want to analyze our workforce. We want to look from more of this kind of strategic point of view, how is our training and development and support ecosystem and communication and leadership, are all of these things fit for purpose? Are they providing for those people's needs? And the biggest challenge here, that to do this good analysis here, we require good understanding of all of these drivers for health, well-being, and human performance. Of course, we can still do this just by feedback and what people think and what they like. But if we want to really take it to the next level, we need to have a good understanding how different factors in this organizational environment affect health and well-being at individual level. And once we identify those gaps, then we go on to building our support ecosystem. So we start first with internal processes, and that means training our managers, leaders, ambassadors to provide that support, to have awareness of the right processes and procedures, to have knowledge where to refer people to, where it goes beyond their capabilities. And only then we look at establishing relationships with external providers who can then provide those specific, who can address maybe specific, health issues, risks, and it's very important that we have this mutual two-way relationship with a very clear referral process. So we know how to refer them, but we also have feedback mechanisms back from them. So we know, oh, our people have been affected by, like very common thing. Now everyone is working remotely. At home, you don't have the same assessments of your screens and chairs and comfort and so on, which kind of leads to huge kind of musculoskeletal issues and pains, right? So there's a lot of those things that we need to know. We need to have the feedback to say, so what can we get the information back from these experts, from their assessments, to know what is it that we need to do? Now, what is also interesting here to highlight, that people actually hide their disabilities and health issues from employers because they are afraid to be discriminated, they are afraid to be treated unfairly. And therefore, it's so important that we also have an impartial, confidential mechanism for people to receive support. If you're saying that your first point of support in our communication is your line manager, you are already putting boundaries on that, because there are specific things that people will never choose to discuss with their line managers. Because even if you are the best manager with the best intentions, like think if you are managing someone and they're struggling with their mental health, are you going to give them promotion? No, probably with best intentions, because you think this person is already struggling, so I don't want to put any more pressure on them. But maybe that promotion is exactly what they needed to build more of the purpose and motivation back in their life, right? So we as managers, leaders, we are not always kind of the right people to make those decisions, and people need to have a right for confidential channels. And therefore, these relationships with external providers and having those feedback mechanisms is absolutely crucial in being able to constantly improve and see what we can build internally. And then finally, we look at the reward and recognition. So, what are the right behaviors? Can we promote, the right conversations? Can we promote the right habits? Can we promote, self-care routines and awareness of, how we should be eating, how we should be exercising? And this really stems a lot from the culture and our ways of working, right? So, for example, one company that we've been assessing, they say like, we have such a good boundaries, between personal life and work. And then when we do observations of the workplace, we see people eating their lunch in front of their desks, in front of the screen while, working. So, there's a lot of these smaller things where you can establish those boundaries and say, these are not acceptable. You should take your break. You should go out. You should go for a walk in a park or whatever that is. But it's so important that this reward and recognition doesn't just stem from, vouchers and, tokens. It's actually what habits we reward in our internal ways of working that will drive that behavioral change that will translate into health and well-being. So knowledge in itself and just access to resources is not enough to drive behavioral change. And this is what I mean, that it has to be embedded in our culture, in our ways of working, how exactly we live and breathe those principles. It's not enough just like, yeah, I know that, chocolate cake is not healthy, but I'm still going to choose that over a kale salad, right? So we know what's good for us, but we still choose to kind of engage in those unhealthy behaviors. So environment, when it's set up right, it can be used as behavioral intervention. So yeah, and then this is probably your whole summary slide. If you want to grab a screenshot, we'll send you a report after this anyway. But this is a summary of the process and steps of designing your own well-being strategy. So creating that psychological safety is key first prerequisite, developing listening channels to understand human needs, conducting gap analysis, developing internal support capacity, building external support ecosystem, and then making sure that we measure what works, we improve what doesn't, and we reward the right behaviors. So I think by now, with some of the examples, case studies, and our framework, you should have much better idea of what good looks like when we talk about organizational health and well-being. But this is a little summary for you here. So what do we want to see? We want to see continuous feedback and listening channels, and not just, one-off asking without actually listening or acting on it. We want all of our initiatives to be co-designed with people, and it's not just something that is just done to them, that we decide that, this is something that we'll do to them. It has to be integrated into culture and operations, our ways of working, and it's not just some sort of standalone initiative that just lives on its own. We want everything that we do with organizational health and well-being to build an internal capacity. If not, we are creating this risk of reliance on external providers all the time. There is value of external providers, but it's knowing what to provide where and who needs to provide what support. We want to look at preventative, proactive initiatives versus reactive crisis point response. And we want to have clear impact measures, knowing what works, what doesn't work, and why, instead of like vanity metrics. And when I say vanity metrics, it's things like, oh, but people like it, right? Or in some cases, engagement rates can also be a vanity metric, right? Like engagement rates means that, you put the right thing out there, but it doesn't tell you whether it actually works, whether it makes a difference, right? So it really depends on what you are using. So how can we measure that success? What are some of those things that are being used? Now, the answer is it depends, because it depends on maturity of your organization. It depends on what you've done before. It depends on the needs of the business, on the needs of the people. But there are some basic human capital metrics that we expect every organization to track. So, of course, you want to check your turnover, retention, absence, sickness rates. You want to understand the causes of those absences and sicknesses. You want to have engagement and satisfaction rates for any initiatives, this as a base. Net promoter score, employee net promoter score is a great measure to see, how likely people are to recommend this workplace as a healthy place to work. Productivity, it's kind of like the very, very basic thing, as you kind of want to look to outputs that are feeding it. But if you want to look at impact, you can see how instead of productivity, we're actually looking at performance. Instead of looking just engagement, you are looking at impact. And we also want to start to look at how our work-related processes are creating some of those stresses, what communication points we have. One of the biggest predictors of the levels of engagement within organizations is the number of communication touch points the employee has with their own line manager. So that's also like one very simple little metric that is correlated to employee engagement. And of course, we want to look at what impact our ways of working and initiatives that we has on physical and mental health of employees. For companies that are kind of want to do extra and have this, want to go this extra mile and want to look at more kind of like advanced ways of assessing things, we really want to understand health and well-being drivers and different factors. And they are split into two categories. There are certain things that are kind of like the basic hygiene factors, right? If you have them, they're not going to improve your health and well-being. But if you don't have them, it will have a huge detrimental effect on it. So this could be, having bathrooms, right? Having accessible toilets, or having some privacy in your workspace, right? So these are not kind of drivers of good health and well-being. It's not just gonna, you're not gonna suddenly start to be happy because, a provider has an on-site bathrooms. But if you don't have them, there are these certain criteria that will have a huge detriment on your health and well-being. And then there are some other positive drivers that really have the impact to increase health and well-being. So you look at things like meaningful work and purpose. You're looking at, again, that psychological safety, sense of belonging. You're looking at the quality of relationships you have with your managers. You're looking even at alignment of your organization. So how consistently you work between departments, how well we are communicating between, top and the bottom layers of organization. So there's all of these other healthy habits, boundaries, and so on, that can have a huge impact on health and well-being. And the way we measure impact with those is, again, going back into correlating to some of your kind of base metrics and impact measures that you choose to measure that matters for you, that matters for your people, and that matters for your business based on the strategic objectives that you are working on. To put this all in context, here is the framework and model that we use to help our clients to build their own cases and to make sure that their initiatives are impactful. So I'll just talk you through that. Well, first of all, you need to know why you are doing this, right? You need to have, clear reasons for why specifically you have chosen to do this specific initiative, but I'll come back to this. So let's say you have an initiative. Okay, you choose something that you want to deliver, what we did, what we do, what people do. That comes with certain level of engagement rates, right? Engagement rates is not the impact measure, right? The engagement rate, it will show you whether that's the right initiative, whether are we doing the right thing, right? We also, by engagement rates, can also show us that is it delivered in the right way, right? Have we communicated in the right way? so that it reaches the right people at the right time, at the right place. So engagement rates is not your impact measure. Engagement rates is just knowing that we are actually doing the right thing and we have communicated out to the right people at the right time. So therefore they have engaged, right? So then when we look at impact, now I would want you to look for evidence in those three areas. And this is like our elite mind model of head, heart, and gut, which is, like the inside, all of the knowledge that we have. Heart is all of the feelings and the kind of, habits and behaviors, all the processes that are embedded in it. So what is the impact of these initiatives on what people know? So what did they, what were the knowledge gaps before and what do they know now? What is the difference on how people feel, how they were feeling before and how they're feeling after the initiative? What is the difference in behavior? So what people did before and what they are able to do now. So we really want to look for this change in behavior. And then what we want to look at, how this change in behavior translates to specific performance metrics in your organization. So I'll give you now a very specific example here. So let's say your initiative, you decide to deliver training to your leaders and managers on how to have mental health conversations at work, right? So you'll say that, okay, 14 out of 17 managers attended. You can kind of extrapolate some of your engagement rates from there. Now, what impact does it have? So you look for evidence, what people know. So let's say before that, they didn't know where to refer people to. They were not aware of policies and procedures. They didn't know what is their responsibility and when they need to refer people to experts. So you quantify that and say that, before that, 79% of our managers didn't know how to access those policies and procedures. And after the training, that reduced to 0. Now that means all of our managers are aware of this. How people feel. We'll say that, okay, before that, 80% of managers reported not feeling confident in having those conversations. So they were not even having those conversations, right? And now after that, they're feeling much more equipped and confident. And, 90% of people feel like they are well equipped to do this. Now what people do. So now as a result of this, now we have seen a 20% increase in informal conversations with line managers, where you are just having those informal conversations about how are you, what's happening, because people have knowledge, people have confidence, you are asking how are you more often, you increase in those conversations, change in behavior. Now that means that there is also and how that links to performance metrics. Now the fact that we have increase in those conversations also led to a reduction in absence and sickness because people were supported much better. And it also had, X percentage of reduction in complaints and grievances, right? And now you can link that clearly to some costs with very clear metrics. If you're building your case, you do this other way around, right? You say like we have X level of numbers of sickness, absence. We don't have those conversations because informal conversations are not happening, because our managers don't feel confident, because they lack knowledge. Therefore, we choose to do this training initiative. And that's why we need your support, investment in this initiative to address those issues. So this model can be really used to demonstrate the impact, but it can also be used as a kind of, back to front model to build your case study to prove what is it exactly that we are trying to do. But you definitely want to have some numbers and figures and some also qualitative data about how people feel, what they know, and looking at what impact that has on our behavior. So yeah, so that's the final bit in our presentation. So for all of those who stayed till the end and listened, we actually have a little gift. I know this was a lot of information, and it probably gave you more questions than answers as well. So we'd love to offer you a free wellbeing strategy review. and you can just have a call, or you can also order a report, the checklist that will take you step by step on kind of assessing how good are you in those areas. Now, the strategy review is free. The report that you would receive as a PDF guide for you to keep, it's normally £49, but you can use this code, so HW strategy for health and well-being, and it will wipe off the price for you. So that means you can have your resource pack and a call with me at no cost, as a thank you for being here, for listening, tuning in, and engaging with us.